Start recording. Right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Special Conversations, the South Orange Library's lecture program. I'm Laura Sims, the moderator, and I'm so excited to have with us Michael Schein today. Mike is not only a very dear friend, but he's also a brilliant business person, speaker, and writer. This is his book, The Hype Handbook. And there is a link to it in the chat if anyone wants to buy from our local indie bookstore Words, or you can find it elsewhere. We also have it at the library. So this is his brilliant book. I read this book like it was a novel. I just ate it up. And I don't read a lot of business nonfiction, but this was, first of all, the advice in it is relevant to all kinds of people, not just inside of the business world, but artists and writers and performers. And also it's just beautifully written and has so many engaging anecdotes. It's like super entertaining and awesome. So Mike will be talking about this wonderful book and also about hype in general, but let me just tell you a little bit more about Mike and then I'll turn it over to him. So Michael Schein is the head hype man at MicroFame Media, a company that specializes in making consultants and coaches famous in their fields. Some of his clients have included eBay, Magento, the Medici Group, UPenn, Gordon College, United Methodist Publishing House, LinkedIn, and Citrix. His writing has appeared in Fortune, Forbes, Psychology Today, and Huffington Post. And he's a speaker for international audiences spanning from the Northeastern United States to the southeastern coast of China. His book, The Hype Handbook, published by McGraw-Hill, appears wherever books are sold. And like I said, the link is in the chat. So please join me in welcoming Mike.
I hope that doesn't set the tone for the rest of the presentation.
Wow, okay, stay.
Well, thanks, Laura. And thank you for the great compliments about the book. That really means a lot coming from you. As you know, I'm a huge fan of your writing as well. So, I thought I would just tell you a little bit about how I got here, since that very...
Oh,
what's that?
Could people mute themselves if...
Okay, can you guys hear me?
They can hear you, yeah. Okay, everybody got muted, except for us.
All right, well, great. Well, in any case, I thought that I would spend the beginning part of the time we have together before, I kind of have an informal discussion with Laura, talking about how this very strange career that I ended up with came to pass. In 2011, I quit my corporate job that I had, and I was very excited for about a day, and then I almost immediately regretted it. So about 10 years before that, I had never thought I was going to be involved in business in any way, shape, or form. I had, much like Laura is, I had wanted to be a novelist. And then after that, I was really interested in playing music, so much so that when I graduated college from the University of Pennsylvania, I had a graduation brunch with my proud parents and told them at that lunch that I was going to move to New York and revolutionize rock and roll with my band. And there was a lot of rending of garments and tears or near tears, but that ultimately was what I did. And everyone thought I was an idiot, but I had more success than I think anyone expected. Certainly not enough to ultimately do it for a living, because that takes a lot. But I'm not a fantastic singer, not a great guitar player. That being said, we had a residency at a well-known club called Arlene's Grocery. We used to sell it out all the time. We were on TV once. We were on the cover of New York Press. And really, the way we did that was through hype. So I barely knew the word marketing. To me, that was a foreign concept. That being said, whenever we would have a show, my bandmates and I, would get together and have some laughs and say, how are we going to hype up this show? And so the kind of things we would do, when we knew we had a show coming up, we would paste posters all around. One of them most notably said, "Dave Matthews must die." Dave Matthews is kind of this hippie frat boy singer. And we would put these posters around and say that, and people would get agitated. And then we'd end up with a full house. Or we had a song called Ash Wednesday. And I used to dress like a nun when singing the song. And before the show, I would walk around the Lower East Side dressed as the nun. And that would work. Or we talked our way onto Showtime at the Apollo, knowing we would be booed off so that we would get written up about it. So we would always do these kinds of things, just kind of benevolent mischief. And it added to the fun that everybody was having. But, as I said, it's very difficult to make your living in a rock band. And I got a corporate job and I thought I would be there for 2 years, but I got serious. I started to quote unquote grow up. And it turned into 8 years. And by the time I thought about leaving, I was making enough money that it was very difficult to leave. And I really only had experience in this one industry. But and I had an infant at the time, and it was difficult to leave. But finally, I heard about this opportunity to become a corporate copywriter. I could write materials, marketing materials in a digital format, because that's where the market has gone, that people would use to sell their technology. So I could use my writing ability and my expertise that I had in business to, make a living. And that's what I did. I quit my job and I went into that business. And I was convinced, because people have always told me that I'm a good writer. They've said I'm bad at a lot of things. I will probably get lost driving around at some point today. That being said, people have always said that I write well, and I always did well at that. So I figured, because I write well, I would just go out into the world and show my ability, and everybody would pay me to write these white papers and websites for them. And that didn't happen. I couldn't get clients. I got a few here and a few there, but I had an infant at home. My savings were dwindling, and I was in bad shape. So I was, that being said, from there, I very quickly decided I was going to learn marketing. It was a short period of time that I thought that my writing would carry the day. I decided I'm going to learn marketing. So I read books on search engine optimization. So that's, the set of technical tricks that you use to get, Google to find your website. I learned about social media marketing. I learned about building sales funnels and took courses. And I thought, now that I'm learning marketing, I'm not resting on my laurels. I'm going to learn how to promote myself. And I was met with failure. I still wasn't getting enough clients. And at this point, I was really ready to give it up. I said to myself, if I can't even learn this wonderful new world of marketing and all of this technological opportunity, and I still can't sell my writing, I must just not be that good. There's either not a market for what I'm selling, or I mustn't be as good as I think I am. And I was already looking for jobs when I had one of those serendipitous sort of moments that changed everything for me. I was living in New York still, and I was downtown, and I walked past that old club that 15, or so years earlier, I had been selling out and that sort of thing. And I remembered thinking to myself, wow, I used to be really good at getting lots of people to notice this thing that I was selling. I mean, it was crazy artsy music, but it was something we were selling, and we used to be able to get a lot of attention. So why was it that now that I was this professional trying to make a living and sell my professional writing services, that I couldn't do the same? And it hit me. The problem was that I was focusing on marketing, and I should have been thinking like a hype artist. So marketing is one of those words that can mean a lot of things, right? I mean, it's a broad word. It used to mean something probably different than it does now. But in short, it's doing those activities that help you get an opportunity to make sales, right? That's what it should be. But what it's come to mean to a lot of people is pushing the right buttons on the right technology, right? And you guys can raise your hand if you've had an experience like this, but who here has ever felt guilty that they haven't blogged enough? They've heard that they should be consistent about blogging, right? Or I really need to start a podcast because everyone has a podcast, right? Or, Instagram is the hot thing, and I haven't mastered the hashtags on Instagram, so I'm not going to be successful. Or for about 9 minutes a few months ago, it was Clubhouse. Did anyone hear of that one? Everyone was rushing to be on Clubhouse. That was going to be the answer to all our problems, Clubhouse. And the problem is, the minute that everybody is doing a certain quote unquote marketing technique, it's too late, unless you're lucky. Because marketing is about standing out, or it should be. And if everyone is following a recipe blindly because other people have done that, you're already too late to the party. Or if you even buy one of these tactical marketing books, how to use Google Plus to make all your dreams come true, it's already too late. That was some author who used this A plus B plus C equals D method to become successful. So what I realized was, if I start to think more about what are those facets of mass psychology, of human nature that we've always had with us, I could do a lot better. I could find the right technology. It almost didn't matter. So the thing that we have to understand about people is that human beings are evolved not to see the world as it really is. We're evolved to see the world in a way that helps us survive, helps our tribe survive, and also helps us reproduce, helps us be fit for the next generation. And sometimes what that means is we take a lot of mental shortcuts. We're also the most social mammals, maybe animals, on the planet Earth. We behave very differently in groups as we do as individuals. So as a result, there are these deeply encoded tendencies that are not very rational in human beings, the way we filter information, the things that get us excitable, that if you can tap into and understand, you'll do very, very well at driving attention, whatever the technology is, whatever the conditions are. So I had that revelation. So I started thinking, how can I study the people who aren't marketers, the people who are really, really good at generating a lot of attention, but who don't call themselves marketers? So I remember I used to do the thing with Dave Matthews. We were a punk rock band, so we picked a fight with a jam band. So I decided to do the same in my business. I started to write articles about business gurus who I disagreed with, and kind of picking them apart and talking about how they were sort of full of it. And as a result, a lot of people out there in the world were thinking the same thing that I did, but didn't have a leader to kind of coalesce around. And I became their tribe leader. And my career started to take off. Slowly but surely, I started to get a steady stream of writing clients. Eventually, it was so much that I was working around the clock. And there's a ceiling to the amount of money you can make, writing pieces. So I started to hire people. It turned into an agency. And now I run, as Laura said, a business called MicroFame Media, where I help companies design these hype campaigns. So that's a happy ending for me, right? Everything went well. But what I realized was the story doesn't end there. It's not a happy ending for so many other people, because there is a myth out there that I see time and time again, that as somebody who has dedicated their life to helping the best ideas get an audience, I work with consultants and executive coaches, not because they were the people willing to pay me. I work with them because I love ideas more than anything. And it's very important for me to have good ideas that are making people's lives better get an audience, instead of the less good ideas or the harmful ideas that so often do. And I often hear this myth that the reason that business owners, consultants, writers, artists, musicians, as long as they're talented, the reason that they're unsuccessful is because they don't embrace marketing, right? This idea that they just think the cream will rise to the top, that if they do good work, it'll just get attention on its own merits. And what they really need to do is take their marketing into their own hands. But I think that's an overly simplified explanation of the problem. In fact, most of the writers, artists, business owners that I meet, especially in the 21st century, are more than willing to embrace marketing. I don't know many writers, artists, or business owners who haven't tried their hand at blogging, who haven't tried their hand at social media, who haven't even maybe paid a little bit of money for online advertising. What I see as the problem is that they're following these ideas about quote unquote marketing as if they were following a recipe in a cookbook. They hear that you're supposed to blog 3 days a week, that you're supposed to tweet 9 times a week, that you're supposed to start a podcast, whatever it is, and they just do it, assuming that the internet fairies will sprinkle customers and readers onto them. And that isn't how things work. That doesn't betray a good understanding of what we're really trying to do. So let me define hype for you, since there's no good definition for marketing. And the title of this is Marketing for Morons, which I know is a little harsh, but I am a hype artist, so you'll have to forgive me. But let me define my definition of hype for you. And I know that hype is often considered a negative word, right? We all have seen that used in a negative way. But the way I see hype is any set of activities that get a large number of people emotional enough to take an action. So let me repeat that. Any set of activities that get a large number of people emotional enough, highly emotional, so that they'll take an action. Now, the action that they take could be a really nasty negative action. And we see it used that way a whole lot, right? But it can also be a really positive action. But that's neither here nor there. Human beings are who human beings are. We react to the same stimuli time and time again in the same ways. It's what are the principles that get people really emotional in a systematic, repeating way so that you can move them in a certain direction. And what you have to understand is that these strategies, which are predictable and which can be sussed out and which occur time and time again, are not immoral, but they're not moral. They're amoral. There is no moral content in hype. So why do so many of us resist it? Well, because on average, immoral people are better at hype than moral people. And there's a reason, and it's probably not the reason that you think. So there was a study done, excuse me, a couple of years ago. It was really interesting. In a laboratory environment, they brought in people with antisocial personality disorder. So for those of you who aren't aware of that term or aren't familiar with that term, antisocial personality disorder is that sort of basket of psychological disorders that includes psychopathy, sociopathy, and extreme narcissism, malignant narcissism. And they brought these people into an environment with a control group, just regular people who didn't have a personality disorder. And what they found was that when they simulated or created interpersonally stressful situations, like they had actors in the room and got them to pick fights with people or created weird dilemmas and things like that. Psychological researchers are good at doing these things. The people like, hopefully you and me, if you're on a library call trying to promote your stuff, I'm assuming you probably don't have antisocial personality disorder. The pulse rate would go up a little bit or quite a bit. The heart rate would go up. Breathing would get shallow. So emotions came up when tension happened, when you had to navigate a tricky social situation. For people with antisocial personality disorder, there was no physiological change, no change in pulse, no change in heart rate, no change in breathing. So what does that say? What that says is that for the rest of us, even if we're not harming someone, if we have to do something that's outside our comfort zone, that is about interpersonal relationships, we get nervous and we start to eliminate cognitive dissonance. We start to make excuses. We start to say things, well, I know that it's probably good to be contrarian in my messaging, but I don't know about that. That seems a little bit weird and that makes me uncomfortable. Whereas people with antisocial personality disorder, they see people as pieces on a chessboard. They just do whatever they need to do to get a response. So as a result, with very notable reactions, the people who are really nasty people are able to engage with human beings in this sort of transactional way. So what's the workaround? If we can go under the thesis that there is some value to understanding how the world really is, not how it ought to be, and there is value in getting large numbers of people predictably emotional so that they'll buy what you're selling, whatever that is, how do we make sure we can repurpose these strategies in a way that's helps increase the sum value of good in the world? Because many people have. I mean, Martin Luther King used these strategies. Richard Branson uses these strategies. A lot of good people have. And what we do is we create a moral filter that once you learn these strategies, if you choose to do so, and I'll give you some ideas on how to do that, you create an unyielding moral filter. And I can't tell you what your moral filter is, but I'll tell you mine. And I think it's a good starting place. My moral filter is I will never use any of this stuff to deceive. No lying, no misleading. Now, a lot of people think hype is lying, but it's not. It has, you can be completely honest and get people emotional so that they'll take an action in a predictable way. And the other moral filter that I use is that I always do everything I can, or I always do these strategies for the purpose of making people's lives better than I found them. Yeah, I'll sometimes do it to enrich myself and that this is what I do for a living. So I'm in business to make a profit. But if what I'm doing doesn't make the people who I'm trying to move and persuade better than they were, I won't do it. And that keeps you on the straight and narrow, because to me, and this sounds very self-serving, but I can't convey to you how much I mean this. Getting hype out into the world and making the case that it isn't an immoral thing, that it's a path to fulfilling your dreams and getting your great ideas, products, and art out into the world is a way of evening the playing field. Because the quote unquote bad guys, they get it already. They're naturals. They're very good at seeing through the surface of things and seeing the world the way it really is. The problem is all of the people who are creating really great work, sometimes life-saving work, are so reluctant or so unknowledgeable about what it really takes to get people charged up and emotional and move them, that they replace that with blogging 3 times a week and really struggle to get their ideas out. So with all of that in mind, you know, we don't have that much time today, and I want to give some time to Laura to do the Q&A. And so when I was thinking about what to talk about today, I was thinking that I could go through 2 or 3 of the hype strategies, the 12 hype strategies in the book, and give some stories and give some examples. But I decided to go for more impact with the limited time we had. Instead of giving you specific strategies and tactics, what I want to talk about are some meta strategies. So what are some ways that you can interact with reality and view the world and look for clues that will help you think more like a hype artist and less like a marketer? So I'm going to go through 3. So the first meta strategy, the first strategy that will help you sort of reframe your thinking and look for examples of hype that you can apply to your own work, is to look to the margins. So what a lot of us do when we finally decide that our work isn't going to stand on its own merits and that we need to attract attention, we look to marketing experts or sales experts or self-help gurus, but usually marketing experts. We buy books written by marketing agency owners. We go to seminars like this about marketing, right? We take online courses, or we look at what people at the center of the conversation are doing. We look at the companies that have big budgets and try to emulate what they're doing. The problem with that is you're not getting the full story. When you're looking at a company with a big budget, you're looking with someone who already has the power, which is typically very different than someone starting out or someone who doesn't have all the resources. And if you're looking at marketing experts, there's always that question of, why are they giving away their secrets? typically they've squeezed every bit of juice out of whatever tactical marketing technological solution that they're presenting. So they can't sell their own products with it anymore. So now they're repackaging it as a course to sell to you. And you'll see that time and time again. Instead, look at people who have really big followings. And even more importantly, I don't mean social media followings. I mean people who will live and die for them. People who just have die-hard audiences that hang over their every word, who never, ever talk about marketing, who never associate themselves with marketing or sales, right? Because that's someone who has a knack for getting large numbers of people energized, not because they're trying to pitch a marketing solution. At the same time, look for people who aren't at the center of the mainstream or who moved from the fringes to the center of the mainstream, because those are people who, against all odds, needed to, create workarounds and take advantage of human psychology to get where they wanted to go. So just to give you a side note about this, one community where hype is not considered a negative world is hip hop, is the world of rap. Rap, which is now the most popular musical form probably in the country, if not the world, came from the South Bronx, which is the poorest area in the United States. And these people were so poor that they didn't even have money for instruments. There's this idea that the cuts to music education were what led to hip hop. So in hip hop, the word hype is a good thing. There's a hype man in rap groups. Hype is a positive thing. There's someone in a group who kind of straddles the line between the music making and getting the crowd exciting and mobilizing the street teams. Because what rappers know and what they've always known is they can't rely on doing things the tried and true way. They can't climb the ladder. They need to rely on using limited resources to excite masses of people in a less than ideal situation. So take a page out of their book. So I'll give you an example of early on in my career when I looked at someone in the margins and brought them over to what I did. And you should always be looking to people who aren't in your field. The farther afield that you can go from your world, the better, because then you have no competition. If you can repurpose other tactics to your world, they'll seem brand new. So as you can imagine, I'm a fan of rock music. I was in a rock band, and I like rock history as well. So when I was first starting the business, before I knew I'd be a professional hype artist, I had read a story about Alice Cooper. And Alice Cooper was, biggest in the 70s. And it was a band, it wasn't the singer. And they were known as the original shock rockers. And they had this brilliant manager named Shep Gordon, who, while other bands at the time were trying to get on the cover of Rolling Stone to show how great their music was, what Alice Cooper's manager calculated was that if they could get on the cover of the magazines that kids' parents were reading, like Newsweek and Time, about how awful and dangerous and filthy they were, that was the best strategy. Because what he realized was that every teenager hits a point where they need to distinguish themselves from their parents. So if he could get every parent in the world hating Alice Cooper, every kid in the world would love them. So to give you an example of how they did this, he had a show, Alice Cooper, the band, had a show in England. They were already big in the US, and they had a show in London in Wembley Arena, and no one knew who they were in England. And it was about a week out from the show, and they had sold 500 seats. So it was going to be a fiasco. So what Shep Gordon did was he commissioned a photograph of the lead singer of Alice Cooper, buck naked, laying down on his side with a boa constrictor obscuring his groin area and nothing else. Then he had the picture blown up to the size of a billboard and mounted it on the back of a truck. Then he paid the truck driver to have the truck break down in Piccadilly Circus at the height of rush hour. So what happened is Piccadilly Circus is the most trafficked area in London. everyone was face to face with, Alice Cooper buck naked. And if you've ever seen Alice Cooper, that's not the most beautiful sight in the world. There were news helicopters reporting this. This thing was such an uproar that it was brought up in Parliament, and they wanted to deport the band from the country. They sold out the arena, and they became one of England's biggest acts almost overnight. Now, here's the important thing. Is the lesson here that to market my copywriting business, that I should have posed naked for a picture and put it in Times Square? Who here thinks that that was the lesson that I brought out? Because, right. The lesson is, what is the underlying principle that you can make appropriate for your space? Because people always ask me that. They say, you talk about all these crazy people. How am I supposed to do that? Hype is not about being crazy. It's about learning what the fundamental group psychology that drove the reaction was and reapplying it. So in my case, I decided that I was going to be the person that all the gurus hated. There were all these marketing and self-help gurus who were peddling all of this dubious advice, who everyone followed, and no one was calling them to task. Everyone kissed their backsides all day long without questioning them. And I believed, and still believe truly, that they're much better at promoting themselves than they are at doing the thing they talk about. And so I wrote articles about that. And Gary Vaynerchuk, who's a big player in that space, called me out directly when I was an absolute nobody. He got completely agitated. He was like sweating, really. All his fans were blowing up my phone. And it was the start of my career. That was my naked billboard, calling out Gary Vaynerchuk. And I didn't even have to take my clothes off, which is a good thing for everybody involved. And everyone was a winner, except for Gary Vaynerchuk. So look to the margins and look outside of your area and look for the underlying mass psychology principle that drives behavior, and then try to reapply that to what you're doing. Second meta strategy. Pay attention to what the gurus do, not what they teach. So this is connected to what I said a minute ago. There are all of these professional expertise givers out there now, right? There are online course providers, there are coaches, there are professional speakers, there are marketing, gurus, and they all give this advice that they have hordes of followers following. What you want to think to yourself is, well, some of the advice could be good. If they really have the results that you want, what are they actually doing to get those results, to get people so excited? And does it line up with their advice? And if not, why? And if you have to favor one or the other, following the guru and expert's advice or emulating what they do to get the reaction, I would go with the former all the time. So another example. So who here is familiar with Tony Robbins? Says, raise your hand if you've heard of Tony Robbins. Okay. So Tony Robbins is probably the highest paid life coach in the world. In some way, some would say he started the field. And his fans are insanely dedicated to him. He fills arenas with fawning, dedicated fans, and he tells them exactly what they need to do to become rich, to become healthy, to become wise, to fix their relationship. There's something online on YouTube, which always makes me laugh. It says, watch Tony Robbins fix this man's marriage in 9 minutes flat. So, and what I've always wondered about Tony Robbins is, if he has arenas of fans, why aren't they millionaires like Tony Robbins? Tony Robbins used to live in a castle, famously. I don't think many of them live in a castle. Why not? So I started to pay attention to what Tony Robbins does versus what he preaches. So one thing he does, he talks with absolute certainty. So it's really good to be nuanced in your thinking. But when it comes to driving a reaction and presenting information, you want to be as black and white as you can be, because the world is a very uncertain place. And people want to know that they can hang on your advice. Now, Tony Robbins would never give this advice, but he always does this. I published a book when I was 18 years old, which seems like a big deal, but it sold about 14 copies. And I almost became a millionaire, but I blew the opportunity. I was in my college dorm room and Oprah, the Oprah Winfrey show called me out of the blue. Someone said, this is whatever from the Oprah Winfrey show. And my book was a humorous teenage driving manual. So the person said to me, we're doing a show about whether the driving age should be raised to 17. What do you think? And in my infinite wisdom, I said, well, on one hand, that would be a good idea because teenagers aren't very safe drivers. But on the other hand, it wouldn't give the kids the freedom they needed. Raise your hand if you think that they brought me on the show. And that was the honest answer. There are pros and cons, but they wanted, this is what needs to happen. You're an expert. Tony Robbins does that. So that's a little piece of advice, but more importantly, look at what the gurus do and emulate them. Another thing that's interesting that Tony Robbins does is he introduces a bit of discomfort into an otherwise transcendent situation, which causes bonding. So this is a weird one. But Tony Robbins does this thing that he's famous for called the hot coals walk. So he has people walk over a bed of hot coals, and it's supposed to get you to face your fears. But there have been religious cults who have people do the same thing. And what it does is a little tiny bit of discomfort, even physical or emotional, bonds you to the purveyor of that discomfort. So do you want to hurt the bottoms of people's feet? No. But what you might say to yourself is, okay, let's say that you're hosting a paid critique group. You're a writer or an editor, and you give advice to other novelists, to aspiring novelists in a group format. Maybe in the middle of this very warm environment that you created, you do a hot seat exercise where you get people a little bit agitated. That would work. That's something Tony Robbins does. He would never tell you to do that. So look at what the gurus do, not what they teach. And that brings us to our third meta strategy. Draw out unifying principles. If you look at the people I'm calling hype artists, so in my book, in the subtitle, it says that I'm looking at propagandists, cult leaders, mischief makers, and boundary breakers. So that's another way of saying I'm looking at non-marketer marketers, right? And if you look at all these people who are so good at getting people emotional and getting them to take action, it can be very overwhelming. It looks like they're all over the map. And you might come to the conclusion that they're just simply charismatic, that they just have a knack for this stuff, that they're just good at it. But what you'll find is if you look at enough of these people and put your critical thinking hat on, you'll see that the same principles repeat time and time again. And what's obscuring you from seeing that is that the details are different. So let me give you an example. Warren Buffett, you know, the financier, the Berkshire Hathaway owner, as far as billionaires go, he has a pretty good reputation. I mean, even people who hate Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk tend to think he's pretty benign, you know, with some exceptions. And Warren Buffett famously has one diploma on his wall. He's gone to Ivy League schools. He doesn't have any of those diplomas up. He has one diploma on his wall. And it's from the Dale Carnegie Institute. And Dale Carnegie was the guy who wrote the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. Warren Buffett took his class and he said it was the most valuable thing he ever did. And if you think about what finance is, in a lot of ways, it's about psychology. He has to persuade people to give him capital to make investments. And one of the principles in How to Win Friends and Influence People is make the other fellow feel like the idea is his. So what that means is if you want to persuade people to do something, instead of just jamming your ideas down their throat, slowly massage them into the idea, ask them questions, ease them into it bit by bit, make them think it's their idea. Okay. There was a number of decades ago, a low-level pimp and car thief whose name was Charles Manson. And he was in prison for these crimes. And in the prison, they were offering a course on Dale Carnegie principles. So he enrolled, and this high school dropout was the star student in the class. He did amazingly in this class. And he embraced the idea, really attracted to the idea of make the other fellow think the idea is his. So when he came out, he was older than the typical hippie generation and the baby boomers. He dressed like a hippie because he was packaging himself in a way that they could easily digest, so he didn't stand out. And he got these middle-class kids around him, and everyone said, how did he hypnotize these kids into doing these horrible things? Well, he would ask them a few questions and he would kind of ease them into it. And do you think we should do this? And it seems like things are getting bad. Maybe the rich people, need someone to show them where it's at. What do you think, Tex? What do you think? And before long, his followers would come up with this horrific idea that he had planned all along. So in one case, you have one of the foremost business people in the world who's pretty much considered ethical by most people who study this. And on the other hand, you have one of the most sinister, evil human beings ever. And the details are completely different, but the underlying principle is the same. Humans are much more alike than they are different. There are only a few things that get us emotional and get us to take action. And if you observe people who are very, very persuasive, almost hypnotic, you can start to extract those principles and then experiment with applying them to your own work, hopefully to do good in the world. So, I called this seminar "Marketing is for Morons," and that's not entirely fair. Marketing technology that we're so obsessed with is an amplifier. In the days of the Roman Empire, the emperors used to commission epic poems, one of which was the Aeneid, as propaganda to legitimize their rule. And it worked very well. But these epic poems were copied by hand. So it took forever for these messages to get out there. Then the printing press really sped things up. The radio, Joseph Goebbels, another horrific person, said that the Nazi Party never would have succeeded without the radio because it was able to spread these propaganda messages so quickly. And now we have social media. The thing is, though, if you're hyper focused on the technology first and about the tactics first, by the time you figure it out, you'll be behind the game. You won't have an advantage. But if you understand human nature, that worked as well in the Roman Empire as it does today, then it becomes very easy to pick the right technology to just amplify your message. And hopefully, you'll use that to increase the sum of good in the world. If you're on a call like this, I'm assuming you're working on something that you really mean to make the world a better place, in a big way or a small way. And some of these awful people that I've discussed, they didn't need a book. They didn't need a course. They didn't need someone to break through to teach them to manipulate human beings in the way that they did. But we can learn, the rest of us can learn how human nature works and use it to make the world a slightly better place, to get our ideas out in the world in an ethical way. And so I'm hoping that you are a little more open to becoming a hype artist and in the future to make the world a fairer and better place than it was before.
Thank you, Mike. That was fascinating. So
Thank you, Laura.
And I recognized a lot of the ideas from the book, but it's really great to have you kind of boil them down and deliver them this way.
Thank you.
I was wondering about the book. How did you come to write it? Like, as you came to these ideas and realizations, when in that process did you decide, it would be a good idea to get this down and get it into a book form?
I guess that it was kind of two forces converging. So on one hand, I thought of myself and think of myself as a writer before anything. I own a business and I like my business a lot, but I self-identify as a writer. So I wanted to write a good book. I've always wanted to write a good book. I'm fascinated with these ideas. Even before I, did this for a living, I used to read about mass psychology and, rock managers and things like that. I also realized at the same time that in what I do, the kind of business I have where I'm not selling a physical product, it's really important for me to position myself as an expert. And a book is by far the best way to do that. There's just something about, again, a heuristic, a mental shortcut. We don't have time to assess every person, on their own merits. So we say, oh, they've got a book and it was published by McGraw-Hill, so they must be an expert. Right. So a lot of people in my world will just write a book for that reason alone, and they'll promise the publisher that they'll buy, 10,000 copies or whatever. And it's just this, sadly, a lot of these books are very generic. They're leadership strategies for the 21st century or whatever. A lot of good ones, but you see that a lot. I knew that I needed a book, but I also wanted to write a really good book. And it probably took longer than it should have. I mean, I really waited for the right idea to coalesce in my head before putting, pen to paper.
Well, it's really good. So
Thank you. Thank you.
It really is. It's such a good book.
It's a lot.
And so do you feel like you had a lot of those anecdotes already in your mind, or did you also do more research? I'm sure
I did a ton of research. I have this process that I learned that I read an article by this guy, Ryan Holiday, who's a nonfiction writer, who learned it from Robert Greene, where they whenever they're reading, whether it's academic papers or books or doing interviews, they take notes, and then they go back and they do note cards, and then they file the note cards. So actually that was a good way for me to really realize that there are universal principles, because I would read biographies on all of these people, and I would read crowd psychology books, and I would read academic studies, and I would interview people because I wrote for Inc. and Forbes. And as I was filing these notes from all this stuff into categories, there would be a few outliers, but there'd be like 12 file sections that would get fatter and fatter and fatter, whether it was a murderous cult leader or Martin Luther King and everyone in between. And I said, wow, this is interesting. Like, there's a science to this, there's something going on here.
Right. That's amazing. And what is the response to the book been?
Yeah, it's been really quite good. I'm fortunate. I mean, I on a couple of levels. So just on a personal level, the thing that has complimented me the most, and maybe this is the frustrated novelist in me, is that a lot of people have said that I had a strong voice, which was really exciting to me, because it's a business book.
Right.
And, people who are friends who, know me, or like, I felt like you were sitting in my living room talking to me, and I spent a lot of time crafting it. So I was happy to feel that. In terms of professionally, yeah, people have seemed to like it a lot. And the way that's, other than the comments I've gotten and the sales, the way that's really played itself out is that it's really created a big upsurge in my business. I mean, like every other business that's in the ancillary to the marketing space, we took a hit during the pandemic. And the book came out, and it really gave us a massive shot in the arm. I mean, most people who hear about us now hear about us because of the book and the promotion for the book. So
right. Well, I don't know if you saw, but Marcia, who's in the audience, just asked, how do you hype a hype book?
I have been practicing what I preach. So I'll give you one of the hypey things that that I did. Just one of many examples. So there's a strategy in the book called create a secret society. And what that basically means is that every hype artist that I studied, almost every hype artist, make their success seem like it's completely grassroots, like people just spontaneously rose up because of how great their stuff is and, followed them. But what they almost all do is they spend a lot of times nurturing not just connections, but like a core of powerful people underneath the scenes that they can call on to accelerate things very quickly. And the way they do that is they typically will give up things to these people over time that are cheap for them to give up and valuable to them. And I don't mean cheap financially. So like, for example, let's say that, it's really easy for you to get concert tickets, and there's a person that who is a multimillionaire in Indiana. I'm actually giving you a real example. a multimillionaire in Indiana who has everything in the world, but what they aren't is tapped into the New York music scene, and their passion is live music. Take them around to a few clubs, easy for you to do. This is a person with a private jet. They'll love you forever, and they'll do things for you. So I adapted that. So what do I have that's easy to give up? So right now I'm writing a column for Psychology Today. The dirty little secret is it's the online Psychology Today. So the print Psychology Today, there's only a few articles a month that can be in there. Online Psychology Today, and I don't usually volunteer this, is as many as they can find contributors for. And they want a lot of contributors because they get more clicks. But to someone who hears, I write for Psychology Today. So I wrote, I came up with a list of 100 podcasts because I know that podcasts drive book sales for me when they're in a concentrated period. And I wrote all of the people who I thought were good and had followings. And I wrote an email that was much better worded than this, but it basically said, hey, I'm a big fan of your show for this and this reason. I'm doing an article on the top 25, podcasts in XYZ field. You're on my short list. I'd love to have a conversation. Oh, by the way, I have this book that's coming out. It might be something you'd be interested in. I booked like 75 podcasts in a month and a half, but no one lost. I mean, I gave them, I got them on a list that they can put on their things, top 15, 25 Psychology Today podcasts. I signed some of the hosts as clients because they had such a good experience.
Wow.
So it's really cheap for me to give up that slot. I need to write articles. I can throw an article like that together in 2 hours. It's extremely valuable to them. And now I have this core of people around me. Now, what most people would do to try to get on podcasts, if they weren't thinking as hype, they would follow marketing advice. Write a pitch letter, create a Excel spreadsheet, say, I have, write your bio and your elevator speech, and this and that. And they're pitched a million times a day. There's no reason for you, them to sign up with you. So I guess the underlying lesson is hype is really about how can you speak to people's self-interest. People don't care about you. They care about themselves, especially if they don't know you. So how can you see the world through their eyes to figure out what gets them charged up or motivated?
Right. Do other people have questions? Don't want to dominate. Oh, Corey.
Hey, I was wondering, it was interesting with the Manson example, which I had no idea about with the Carnegie class, but of the people that you profile in the book, how many of them just sort of are the type of person that just has a natural understanding of how to manipulate masses of people versus people that actually like trained and took lessons and that kind of thing?
Most didn't formally train. I mean, I mean, they didn't all come to it naturally. Some of them developed the skills over time, but there aren't many people teaching hype because I kind of came up with the idea of studying it systematically. Yeah. Most people teach marketing, and that's something you can train. These are people who they figured it out, right? So, right. Many people pass through the Dale Carnegie class every year. Most of them don't start death cults that are covered in the news for 70 years or whatever it is. Andy Warhol was pathologically shy, but he was so ambitious that he figured out how to turn his weaknesses into a strength. So where most well-functioning non-megalomaniac people would try to overcome their shyness and become just sort of a little better, at not being shy, he turned his shyness into this weird, cold persona that made him famous. So people would ask him, why do you paint soup? The press famously asked him, why do you paint soup cans? And they expected him to do what his predecessors, the abstract expressionists, did, go on this big diatribe explaining their art. And he said, because I like soup. And the press wrote about him he couldn't just mean he liked soup. So, I mean, what I extracted from that is one way to position yourself as a larger than life figure, if you're not a larger than life figure, which most people aren't, is to take your weaknesses and your insecurities and find how that can be flipped into a strength, because a lot of people have the same strengths as you do. I'm a good writer, fantastic, you and everybody else, you know what I mean?
Right.
But I'm a total people pleaser. You know, I don't like that about myself. But I'm the guy who came up with Create a Secret Society. I flipped it into a strength, and I hold dinners. I hold secret society dinners, you know?
Why aren't we invited to
Oh,
those?
Well,
what the hell?
well, first of all, they haven't happened for 2 years. And second of all, I have invited you and you didn't go.
We'll have to talk about this later.
Yeah.
Does anybody else have a question for Mike before we're running out of time?
I don't have a question, but I wanted to, oh, sorry. I don't hear you now, Laura. I don't hear
I hear
anybody.
you, Marcia.
Yeah, I got muted. I got
I
muted.
was like, I don't hear anybody. Okay, no, I just wanted to thank you, Mike, because I was in advertising. I was a copywriter, and I left that when I had kids, and now I have 2 businesses, and I knew I couldn't transfer the kind of skills I had into my small businesses. And I didn't want to. I knew that was wrong, but I was in this limbo of where to be, because I didn't agree. Social media, the way it works, I don't like. But what you're saying makes total sense to me, and I'm gonna buy the book, and
Thank you.
I'm very excited. So thank you.
I'd love to talk to you because I'm so interested in what the agencies did. I mean, they were, you know, the Mad Men era ad agencies were so brilliant and sinister. I mean, you know, there was that book, The Hidden Persuaders, where they talked about how ad agencies were completely creating demand where none existed. But when the social media thing happened, as I see it, and I'd love to hear more, they have been really, really bad at adapting to the change. You know, when they started, they just created ads for the internet. And it's funny, you can tell when an industry is losing relevance when all the mergers and acquisitions start. What they're doing is they're going around, instead of creating, instead of adapting and creating good social media programs, they're going out and buying social media agencies. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens. So I'd love to talk to you. We should keep in touch because I'm curious.
I would love to talk to you too, because I was general, and they were trying so hard to fit like a square peg into a round hole. So
they did not do it. And I wonder how it's going to turn out. I wonder how those big agencies are going to end up in all this.
Not good for them.
Yeah.
I can connect you too. Connect you too. Well, I think we are out of time. I wish we could go longer. This has been so great, Mike. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. I had so much fun. This was awesome.
Fascinating. And thanks to Michael Pucci, our producer. And I just want to announce that the next program is next Thursday. It's going to be our first evening program. We're going to start having monthly evening programs. And next Thursday is at 7 p.m. We're having novelist Mona Awad, whose new book, whose new book, All's Well, we're going to talk about. And it's about Shakespeare and chronic pain and dark wish fulfillment. It'll be really fun. So please tune in. Again, thank you so much, Mike.
Thanks, Laura. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Mike.
This was a blast. I really enjoyed this.
Thank you. All right. Bye, everybody. Thanks for tuning in.